as we are, in actuality, each this real awareness, a real awareness, which is this isness, an isness true reality, which is everything, then it is this one everything isness real awareness that is animating through all created consciousness, as all consciousness expresses its idea constructed design into all the subsequently effected uniqueness and differentiation of body form and simulation. From the personal self-perspective, it would seem that the body form, our experiences, and our lifetimes are ours exclusively, as the simulators do present us with the illusion of apartness, separation, in regards to our body types and the experiences they go through. But as I said, in reality, it is the real awareness of each individual animating through its created consciousness, a real awareness that is a part of this isness everything, and from that perspective, that of the is, every simulated lifetime and body type therefore stems from the same source. As such, the personal self can be shown by the real awareness, the real guides, this isness everything, anything simulated effected from any consciousness, if it makes sense awareness-wise to do so, as everything's about awareness and the becoming more so aware, as though the real awareness can present any view, akin to sitting the personal self down in a cinema, with every movie, every simulated situation available for perusal, as effected from ideas of any consciousness now. As such, we can have real side experiences where we are witnessing events, but are not participating, as sometimes direct involvement isn't necessary. But then, in other cases, the real awareness, the guides, may place a simulated avatar into the scenes that we experience the situations through, or we may simply switch our view to that of one of our actual operating life-level body vehicles. Either way, it is then that we have an inserted body form that those in the experience can engage with, not always in a positive way, as in the cases where we are in the presence of the dark forces, but then it is all about gleaning the attention of all in the simulators, to present the ears predominantly, to assist or interact with others, gleaning agreement to effect better simulator circumstances, etc., through the various assignments we have the option to agree with and participate in. This real side experience would open up with me in just an observing, aside from simulation insertion capacity. I would witness a group of scientists as real awareness impressions revealed. They appeared human, but were those of a very developed capability where the application of science is concerned. They seemed to be having a conference or other in a spacious room, and in the presence of many others. Evidently these scientists were those of some significance, hence why I was to be observing this situation. Nothing was revealed as to what exactly they were involved with, only that they were not Dark Force affiliated, their intentions sincere, in that they desired that their work provide only that which would be beneficial. And then there was a commotion. It was rather difficult for my personal self to determine the exact specifics of it, though the intent behind it was clear. It was a dark force interjection into these affairs, a kidnapping in fact of these scientists. Only the method was very nonsensical to the personal self, as though the dark force agents bursting into the scene were not fully present, as though ghosts, perhaps impacting this one-dimensional simulated position from another, as the dark forces can do, and so their impacting actions would seem as though the work of phantoms or poltergeist phenomena. They seemed to employ curious technology that warped and distorted the very simulated scene all the individuals and scientists were operating and having their conference within, as though a technology that could glitch and disrupt the simulated scene, just like applying, say, a virus to a computer game, as creation is based on the same fundamental computer-like mechanics. This dark force action caused disruption, confusion, fear. It in fact rendered several individuals dead, as though for some the technology had caused irreparable harm to their very simulated avatars, and amidst the chaos were the scientists sequestered away, relocated elsewhere. It seems then the scientists had created or were presenting beneficial ideas that didn't sit favourably with the dark force simulator controllers, and the scene would fade. There was no further need for me to remain here in my observing position any longer. In fact, as it transpired, it was a time to be a simulator inserted, that the avatar I would be operating through could not only engage with others in the simulation, but impact it also. In turn, so could my avatar equally potentially be subject to impact. But this always is the situation when we directly interact with the simulation as effected from ideas, as opposed to just observing aside from its influence. It wasn't made apparent where the scientists had been taken, but as I said earlier, the real awareness, this isness everything, is through all consciousness as it effects into a simulation. Nothing is beyond its reach and view, no matter how secluded. And of course, we can't feature in the experience of others without their agreement that we can. But since we all have uploaded to the consciousness the overall simulator layout, as we all have the ideas of it in the consciousness, we all are privy to access its effected from these ideas multi-dimensional entirety. And when it comes to created, simulated situations within the overall arena, the guides simply find where agreements lie that we can be interjected, as after all it takes is for one individual in the scene to have an agreement with us, even an agreement consciousness installed 1,000,000 lifetimes ago, and now they carry the idea of us in their consciousness, so potentially always can be effected into their simulation our avatar body form, a form that effects from the idea of us that their consciousness contains. And so it was that I found myself now, my simulated body form, in a kind of a dark force complex. There present would be the scientists that had been abducted. They were working in a large and very advanced dark force laboratory, but seemed to all be in a kind of semi-coma, or in induced stupor as though drugged. The impressions afforded via the real awareness were that the dark forces, rather than destroy the scientists, as they may easily have done, had abducted them, had threatened them, attempted to intimidate them into using their developed science for the dark forces, instead of for the benefit it was meant for. But the scientists had been resilient and determined in their resolve, refusing to use their work for what would be detrimental and destructive purposes. As a resolution to this dilemma, so the dark forces had chemically induced a kind of semi-hypnotic and very suggestible state in the scientists, which rendered them incapable of refusal, but a state that didn't detract from their scientific effectiveness. Hence the scientists going about their work in the lab, but in their half-asleep, semi-conscious states. I was here then to rescue these scientists consequently, and I quickly determined that to maintain the docile states of them, so they had to be administered constantly a kind of injected serum. For indeed, the scientists had tubes that were attached to their arms, connected to large vats of this substance, that at certain intervals would a time-release mechanism have the serum flow through the tubing and into the scientists' arms, thus maintaining them in their quasi-comatose, yet still functional states. This, then, was a rather simple situation to remedy. Not only can we be inserted into any simulated situation, but through a real awareness that is and can access anything, so we can be afforded everything we need to do whatever is required in any situation, operate alien technology, speak in languages our personal self has never heard of, and in this case, the technological know-how to make subtle alterations to the very chemical make-up of the fluid that the scientists were receiving. For were I to simply remove the tubing from the scientists, real awareness impressions assured the personal self that this would trigger an alarm of a kind, and then the situation would become more complicated, with having to deal with the expected influx of dark force agents and militia and so forth. An alteration in the chemical formulae of the fluid would not trigger any alarm, and on doing so I would have to be patient for the effects the scientists had been subjected to abate, which took several rounds of the now altered serum to enter their bodies. The scientists came to their senses. I would explain to them what had transpired, as they had no memory of their abduction, and indeed had no recollection of anything, including the work they had been doing in the lab since. My real awareness impressions identified a key moment, a time window, where the movements and positions of dark force guards would be such that would be the best opportunity to extract the scientists. The compound wasn't heavily guarded, as though the dark forces hadn't expected any severe security issues or breaches, though enough to be problematic, and if it turned into a shooting frenzy, which it could very well escalate into if we were discovered, the scientists may get caught in the fire. This was then the most prudent method, a subtle interjection, bringing the scientists to their senses through the altered serum, and now a stealthy extraction. Prior to this window of opportunity and escape opportunity opening up, so on a few occasions would the dark forces check in on the scientists. But we had anticipated this as we waited, and the scientists would pretend as though they still were in their controlled, daze-like states, pretending to continue with their work as I hid. And then came the optimum escape moment. The guards had moved around from one side of the building, and it is from that side that we exited, and I led the scientists from the compound. The sense was that we were on a kind of island. I'm uncertain as to how the scientists left the island or where they went next, presumably back to a safer position, for I would never see that scene, but my impressions provided assurances they were indeed safe, and were now under some form of protection, possibly via the guides, etc. So all in all, a successful rescue for what were, as I said, scientific individuals whose work would be of a great benefit in some undisclosed form or other, hence the dark forces' interest in having it for themselves. Who can say what may happen next? But for now, the dark forces were denied. In an altogether separate and unrelated scene, I would find myself positioned in what seemed to be a huge space dock of a kind, where spacecraft associated with all manner and variety of alien species and body types would make use of the facilities. Overall, the space dock and station were designed to provide repairs to any spacecraft cleared for entry, as the rigours of space can be quite wearing, depending on the function of the spaceships, etc. Additionally, then, would the station provide habitation for as long as was required for each alien individual or group, with recreational facilities available, and so forth. So it was along the lines of a kind of Star Trek conglomeration of all species association initiative. Evidently of those species on friendly terms, hence the clearance required to dock one's craft at the station. As it transpired, I was a part of a team whose responsibility was to the well-being, maintenance and reparation of the craft that required it, and although my personal self has no knowledge or ability where spacecraft repairs are concerned, through this particular consciousness-affected body form did I have the necessary skills. I failed to recall my body form appearance, though I knew it wasn't as my form is on the physical. Again, the real awareness can provide everything we need for every eventuality. Repairing alien spaceships, not a problem. It was uncertain as to why I was in this capacity, but my impressions were that this seemed to be one of my alternative and constant functions, and only in this real side experience was I given a glimpse and a view of that which I am also involved with. At one point, a particular spacecraft would enter, but hailing from a different dimension. It had the capability then to traverse dimensional frequencies at will, by making adjustments to the vibrational rates of the ship and the bodies of the crew. Dimensions are separated by frequency vibration rates, and to operate within a dimension, so everything within it, including the body forms, also must vibrate within the frequency range that is the dimension they are in. To switch dimensions requires then an alteration that the ship and indeed the crew's body forms now vibrate at a frequency which corresponds to the dimension they wish to transition into. Only in this instance, some malfunction in the ship's calibrations had it that part of the ship hadn't made the dimensional jump, as though a section of it, about a third of its overall mass, had failed to have its vibrational rate thus altered to allow it to be present with the other 2/3 of it. The crew had been unharmed, fortunately. All had had their vibratory rates altered accordingly for the dimensional jump, but had they been stationed in the part of the ship which hadn't, they now would be in this dimension, yes, but absent of the part of the ship they had been in, that was effectively left behind. They would be floating in space, in fact. Again, fortunately, none of them had been in that part of the ship, and now was the situation where the ship was as though operating multi-dimensionally, one part of it here, the other part in the dimension it had been, but intrinsically linked nonetheless. Due to the nature of the science behind the ship's dimensional capability, so it could now not return to the dimension it hailed from, as seemingly the entire ship was designed to jump, not just part of it, and were it to attempt to do so, this would likely render its destruction. This wasn't an issue, however. The repair team and myself had dealt with similar situations before. We as though encased what would have been the area of space the part of the ship left behind would have occupied, in a kind of energy field enclosure. The enclosed area, segregated from everything else in this dimension, would then have its frequency altered to match that of the dimension the ship had come from, as though creating a contained pocket of this other dimension. And the part of the ship left behind would manifest in this enclosed containment field, as naturally it was visible because the frequency within the field matched that of the part of the ship in the other dimension, although through the field the part of the ship contained within it would appear to the eye a little translucent. The standard procedure then was a controlled destruction of that part of the ship left behind, for yes, we could render it visible in the containment field, viewing it from where it was in the dimension it was in, but not bring it through seemingly without destroying the entire ship, but were able to destroy the left behind section in what was a different dimension to the one, the rest of the ship, that had successfully made the jump, ourselves and the space station was within. This done, so the containment enclosure was deactivated, the window to the other dimension shut down. The ship then had that section of it absent, and the team and myself now busied ourselves in repairing the ship and making it space-worthy once more. It would take a while, so the crew would have to take up accommodation in the habitation areas provided until our work was completed, and the scene and experience would end there.
Ta-da! That was cool, Kevin. That was terrific. Yes. A lot happening, a lot to do. We get to do it and see how it affects here and everybody asleep here, etc. Little by little, like little raindrops, we see what's happening. So, yes, thank you for showing up. Thank you for sharing. Thank you, Kevin.